So here's some big news coming out of Japan. For the first time in what feels like forever, the government's budget is projected to actually have a surplus. Now, on the surface, that sounds amazing, right? A sign of a strong economy, fiscal responsibility. But is it really? Today, we're going to dig into the numbers and see if this surplus is the real deal or if it's just hiding some much deeper problems. Let's get into it.
Okay, let's get right to it. This is the number that's making all the headlines. For the 2026 fiscal year, the projection is a primary balance surplus of 1.3 trillion yen. To put that in perspective, this would be the first time Japan's books have been in the black in 28 years. That's a huge deal. But to really understand what this means, we have to get clear on one very important term. And that term is the primary balance. The easiest way to think about it is like a household budget. It's the money coming in, that's tax revenue, minus the money going out for things like public services. But here's the key, and you have to remember this for later. It totally excludes the interest payments that Japan has to make on its gigantic mountain of past debt. So it's really just a snapshot of this year's performance, not the country's total financial health. Right, so keeping that primary balance in mind, how on earth did Japan pull this off after nearly 30 years deep in the red? Was it some sudden drastic belt-tightening by the government? Well, the real story behind this number, it's probably not what you think. This is where we have to bust a pretty common myth. On one side, you have what everyone just assumes happened, The government got tough, slashed spending, maybe raised taxes. But the reality, as you can see on the other side, is completely different. The government's income went up, not because of new tax hikes, but simply because the whole economic pie got bigger. The real drivers here were actually inflation and wage growth. Think about it. As prices and salaries go up, people and companies just naturally pay more in taxes. Corporate taxes, income taxes, consumption taxes, you name it. And that pushed revenues to record highs. Basically, the economy's overall size grew so fast that it created this huge tax windfall. And that's what led to the surplus. It wasn't really fiscal discipline, it was just the economic conditions of the moment. Okay, so the surplus is thanks to a growing economy. Sounds great, right? But, and this is a big but, this is where the story starts to get a little tricky. While that headline number looks fantastic, if you look just beneath the surface, you'll find 3 major risks just waiting to spoil the party. You can think of these risks as 3 big hurdles that Japan has to clear before we can really call its finances healthy. First, there's this sneaky spending habit they have. Second, some big long-term costs are already locked in and they're just getting bigger. And third, well, remember that huge expense that the primary balance doesn't include? Yeah, that's a big one. Let's talk about hurdle number 1, the supplementary budget trap. In Japan, it's almost a tradition. The government passes its main budget, looking all responsible. But then, later in the year, they tack on these massive spending packages for things they call economic stimulus. In the past, these extra budgets have completely wiped out any progress they made, turning what could have been a surplus right back into a deficit. It's a really tough habit to break. All right, on to hurdle number 2. Permanent government spending is actually going up. And we're not talking about small stuff here. We're talking about huge long-term commitments, like a bigger defense budget and brand new childcare initiatives. On top of all that, with an aging population, Social Security costs just automatically grow by up to 1 trillion yen every single year. These aren't one-time things. They are baked into the budget for years and years to come. And that brings us to the third and honestly, the biggest hurdle of them all. It goes right back to our definition of the primary balance. It conveniently ignores a massive expense. So what happens when we finally add back in the interest payments on all that debt Japan has piled up over the decades? This chart, wow, it really tells the story. That little green sliver on the left, that's our 1.3 trillion yen primary surplus. But that monster red bar next to it, that's the interest payment on the national debt. It just completely dwarfs the surplus. So even with the primary balance in the black, Japan is still running a massive overall deficit. It's like your paycheck finally covers your monthly groceries, but you're still drowning in credit card debt. Okay, we've been talking in trillions of yen in fiscal policy, and that can feel pretty abstract. So let's get down to brass tacks. What does this new economic reality actually mean for you, for your family, and for your wallet? Yeah, let's ask that question directly. Because believe me, the way the government decides to balance its books has a real, tangible impact on your personal bottom line. So let's break it down. When it comes to taxes, you probably won't see a big, flashy consumption tax hike anytime soon. Instead, the burden is shifting to what you might call hidden costs, like higher social insurance premiums getting taken out of your paycheck for things like childcare and defense. For Social Security, you can probably expect higher healthcare costs if you're a senior who's still working, and pensions that just don't keep up with the rising cost of living. And this one's a biggie. As interest rates go up, your variable rate mortgage is going to get more expensive. And while your savings might earn a little more, it probably won't be enough to beat inflation. And this is probably the most crucial takeaway for your personal finances. Your boss might give you a raise, which sounds great, but after they take out more and more for social insurance, the actual money hitting your bank account might not be any bigger at all. In fact, it could even be less. That's a huge part of how this new budget balance is being achieved. So, where does all this leave us? What's the big picture here? We are clearly walking into a new economic reality in Japan. And it's so important to understand what's fundamentally changed. There's a quote from the source material that just absolutely nails it. The surplus is an improvement on thin ice. I mean, that's a perfect way to put it, right? It looks good on the surface, but it's incredibly fragile because it's being propped up by something the government doesn't really control: inflation. And that really gets to the heart of it. This isn't a story about the government suddenly striking it rich, not at all. It's a story about a fundamental shift in how the nation's bills are getting paid. The books are looking better, sure, but it's happening through a mix of inflation and rising contributions and costs shouldered by the public. Which brings us to our final question. Look, getting to a primary surplus is a significant milestone. There's no denying that. But it forces us to ask a much bigger, more important question about the trade-offs involved. As the nation's accounts start to look healthier on paper, we have to ask, who is really paying the price for that improvement? Definitely something to think about.